The Virtual Curbside is a production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Utah AAP, working together to improve children's lives through education, advocacy, and networking. Hi, this is Paul Wirkus from the Utah AAP. Welcome to this week's edition of the Virtual Curbside, where we bring pediatric providers together with subspecialists to get smarter about all things pediatric and better acquainted as a community of caregivers. The Virtual Curbside is brought to you in part by a generous grant from Primary Children's Hospital. Primary Children's Hospital, the child first and always. Welcome back to the Virtual Curbside. As you may remember from last week, we're doing things a little bit differently this month. What we're hoping to do this month is to talk to people. This is almost like a two-part process that we're talking not only about topics, but talking about implementation of topics through the process of quality improvement. And Dr. Ryan Gottfredson has been kind enough to join us this week. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So first of all, you trained medical school in Missouri, and where did you do your residency?
So first residency in general pediatrics was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And so it was a combined Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright State University program at Dayton Children's mostly. That's residency number one, was there.
And then you did public health too, right?
So right, I was a practicing pediatrician for a couple of years while I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base. And then one night I was on call, I still remember this distinctly, and an email came through to like all Air Force medical basically. And they said, do you want to be a preventive medicine physician? You should do it. Even if you've trained in something else, we'll take you. So I got intrigued and applied, and Air Force was kind enough to train me in a second residency. So I did preventive medicine with public health. It's a combined program. Everyone gets an MPH as part of that residency program. And that was up at USUS, at Uniformed Services University. And great experience there. It was incredible. It's great.
That's great. So you come to your practice of pediatrics through a background in preventive medicine, public health, and practice in the Air Force.
Absolutely. That's a huge lens that I use to look at everything.
I bet. Yeah, and I bet it is. So before we get started, do you have any conflicts of interest to disclose?
I do not. No disclosures today.
All right. I wanted to get your perspective too. How did you get interested in the whole process of quality improvement?
Actually, it ties right to what we were just talking about with my background in preventive medicine. So when I was a resident, I think the QI projects felt a little onerous. I didn't really catch the vision as a pediatric resident. We kind of had to do QI projects, and it felt like it was separate from what I was trying to do with learning basic pediatrics. But once I got into preventive medicine, public health, and really saw the science behind quality improvement, it blew my mind. It's like, wow, there's a full science behind this. There's so much amazing research on how to improve quality, and that was a big part of our program.
So, yeah, and it's interesting because as part of the whole maintenance and certification program through the American Board of Pediatrics, there is some quality improvement that's built into that.
Absolutely.
And I find that for most practitioners, you either own it or you skate it. You figure out how to
Yes.
put it all together. And I think there's a lot to be said for embracing it and trying to do something worthwhile.
I really believe that. I think it's true. And we get caught up in the day-to-day grind sometimes. And depending on the practice structure, sometimes it feels like it's about the business of medicine sometimes, and taking a step back and saying, what about the quality of medicine? What about the quality of our
Sure.
practice? And I think that's a huge question to keep asking ourselves.
Sure, absolutely. So we want to talk this week a little bit about the whole notion of emotional resilience in children and families. So tell me why this topic matters.
Gosh, why does it matter? I think for me personally, it's the people that I know and love that have watched go through difficult things, and to watch people bounce back and do well through
Mhm.
adversity and hardship and thrive and grow, and then watch the suffering and watch people that really get burdened down by things, and watch family members, loved ones, patients, people I've worked with. And you have to ask yourself, like, what's the key ingredient here? What is the secret sauce? What makes the difference between whether or not someone can bounce back through adversity, or are they going to be really brought down by it and taken down? So I think the reason why it matters, we all experience it, we all face it, it is very personal to, I think, every human on earth, goes through something. And as a pediatrician, as a physician, every day we're working with people that are going through hard things.
It just occurs to me that in some ways, building emotional resilience is a little bit like emotional immunization.
I love that.
How do you give
I
somebody
love that.
a skill set to deal
Yeah,
with with stresses? You never know what stressors are going to happen, but you know that
right.
stressors do
You
happen.
just know it's going to happen.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and you want to come through it resilient and intact. And
Right.
let's talk about stress. I think that in their hearts, a lot of parents would like to avoid all stress for their kids, and that's never going to happen.
Not going to happen. And you can identify, any parent can identify with this instinct of saying, I want to protect my child,
Yeah,
especially parents that have gone through hard things themselves. You see it all the time. It's like, that was hard for me. I want to protect my child from this thing. You see it well meaning families that want to protect their kids from every poke, every bump, every hard thing that could happen because they love their kids and they're their precious child. They want to protect them. And that is built in. That's our instinct as parents. And it makes sense why that would be something that we have to try to have a conversation about.
I suppose you could make a bumper sticker. Stress happens.
Yeah,
Despite our
you
best
got it.
effort to insulate kids from stress, it's going to
Yeah,
happen. And
absolutely.
it's not a sign of parental failure.
It
So,
is not.
looking at stress, what would you teach a family? How would you see stress in little kids?
So, I mean, that first point I think you just mentioned is the first point I'd make with a family is a baby from day one is experiencing stress in different ways. Out of the womb, it's less comfortable than in the womb. Not being held in the bassinet is less comfortable for a child than being held in the arms of their parent, right? So,
Mhm.
from day one, they're going to, what's that strange sensation that newborn is feeling in their gut as it's getting populated with bacteria for the first time? That's a little bit stressful for a little baby. And they're going to cry and they're going to react to that. So it's actually possible to begin this conversation about recognizing stressors in life from day one with an infant. So I think the first step is talking with families about, hey, this is the normal part of life. And in a young child, I guess the question in my mind, Paul, is not, oh, what does stress look like in a child? Is it because they're experiencing stressors every day? Where's the line at which it becomes toxic? At which it's becoming,
Sure.
it's not just the day to day normal stress that they're learning and growing from, but now it's become something that is potentially problematic. Is it a toxic stress or is it something that's causing a problem for the child that needs to be addressed? And I think what you're looking for as a parent is that, right? What sort of signal do you get from a child who's experienced sort of a toxic level of stress that is potentially going to be an issue? And I think in a young child, you're going to see behavior changes.
So yeah, and so you make an interesting point because as I reflect on it, as you say this, the toxic level of stress doesn't necessarily indicate that it's a stressor that a child shouldn't have to deal with, and it may differ from child to child.
100% true. In fact, I was thinking about this, trying to look at how do we know what works for building resilience and so forth. And I'm not a massive academic in this field, but I'm aware of this famous Kauai longitudinal study. This was like 1955, I believe, 700 or so kids that were looked at on the island of Kauai. And there was this long-term longitudinal study. And really they were looking at what is the thing that makes a difference. And they were very surprised by the findings. One of the big take-home messages from this famous study is that about a third of all the kids that were considered high risk children grew up into competent, confident, caring adults. So what they did is they looked at all these kids and tried to figure out who are the kids that we think are like highest risk. They're experiencing what we could maybe call toxic stress, right?
Mhm.
There's something really bad happening in their life, poverty. There's something that you would say, all right, this means this kid may have a really rough life or may become maladaptive or may have some issue. They're experiencing really concerning stress. But even among that group that they sort of predicted, these are the kids that are going to have a rough time, a substantial portion of them were just fine. So that's the third, that those group of kids are kind of that interesting group, right? What was it about those kids that all of them were experiencing this high stress? What was the thing that made the difference in the kids that did well despite it? So to your point, I guess a little bit, or maybe the point that you're alluding to, just because a child is experiencing some sort of a major terrible life event or something really difficult doesn't mean they're going to turn out bad. This is where we get down to what about this resilience idea? How do you help a child set up for success because they may experience something pretty above average bad?
So how do you teach This is a two-level teach. How do you teach parents to teach resilience?
Oh man. Okay, I have to take my hat off to, I think, who many people would consider the guru of sort of teaching resilience from a pediatrician standpoint, Kenneth Ginsburg. He wrote that really influential book. I think, what was it called? How to Build Resilience in Children and Teens. And one of the things that he emphasizes, and it seems like when he talks about this topic, is step one is to build a rock solid, loving relationship between the parents and the child. That is the number one thing that helps a child get through this adversity, is to know that they've got a parent who's got this enduring love for them. The parent loves this child no matter what, and they can rely upon that. According to that research that he cites, that is one of the first principles, one of the number one things that is associated with building resilience. And I think that's an important conversation for pediatricians to have with parents. Because, of course, we would presume parents love their children, but how do you show that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you help your kids know that you love them and know that they can rely upon that no matter what? I think that's a really important conversation to have with parents. In fact, that Kauai longitudinal study, as they looked at that third of those children that were highest risk that did the best in that cohort, that was the number one thing, is that they had this relationship with a competent, caring adult. That's what it was. Sometimes it was a teacher or a mentor if the parents kind of somehow failed, because that can happen. But they really had that long-term relationship with a loving adult in their life.
So you characterize that relationship as partly that you love kids regardless. What skills do you encourage parents to develop to be able to do that?
So if I could just shamelessly borrow from Ken Ginsburg again.
Oh, borrow away. Yeah. Appropriate.
I'm going to appropriate. I just so appreciate his work. But he talks about the concept of balanced parenting. And I think many people are familiar with this. I think a lot of us talk about it, but the idea that you can be loving and firm. That loving doesn't mean that you just allow your child to do anything, but a loving parent will have boundaries for their child, firm boundaries that they will reinforce all the time, not to control them. A boundary setting parent isn't necessarily a controlling parent, but it's a parent that has certain boundaries set in the child's life to help them, to protect them, right? And then you have to circle back. This works if you keep circling back and say, and help the child understand, because I love you. It's because I love you that I'm protecting you with this boundary. And that works in the end. So lovingly firm, I think, works. And I think you can do that. And you don't have to be a pushover parent. It's like, fine, here's the Twinkie if you throw down a tantrum, right? That's not necessarily what we're talking about by being loving. We're saying you can love your child and you can say yes a lot, but you can have boundaries from the beginning. You can actually start to develop those skills in children at young ages, or that concept with children at young ages. For example, your toddler that you're trying to teach how to sleep on their own without necessarily being held by a parent to fall asleep. You can start to have that conversation about, all right, we're going to create a boundary here that's important, that you sleep in your own bed, in your own room. That's its own podcast or podcast series, Paul, of course, of how to get a toddler to sleep at night. But the concept is there, which is like, you can love your child and also be firm on certain things.
So that's going to be a different thing, obviously. So the sleep training thing is often a pre-verbal child. And so some of it is that you just establish a boundary. And what you're teaching parents to do is, I think, giving them permission to set a boundary, and also, I guess, giving them the wherewithal to say, I'm doing the right thing, even though this may be a painful thing.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So now let's talk about a slightly older child. How can you think of any good examples for like school age child of an effective boundary versus an ineffective boundary?
I think the effective boundary is a firm boundary that's set and calculated to protect the school age child, and that is firm, that doesn't waver. And the thing that comes to my mind is phone use. You have a boundary for your children on use of technology and phones. And if you're a Jonathan Haidt follower, then that social media use is until they're like, what, 18,
35.
I
think is what he said. Yeah.
Let's let them develop first until,
right.
And then maybe. Mm-hmm. But the concept is, because I love you, right? We're going to have some technology because we wanted to raise digitally competent kids, not digitally dysfunctional kids, but we're going to set a boundary here, but it's going to be a firm one. We're not going to have screens in your bedroom. We're not going to do screens in your bed. We're going to turn it off at a certain time or take breaks. And what kids do, young kids and even teenagers are classic, they're going to push against that. And they're going to see like, how firm is that boundary and what are the exceptions to the rule? It's almost like a scientist testing the rules of the universe to try to figure out what is it that governs my life. And so I think that's where it becomes sort of ineffective, as if it's very wishy-washy. And if it's like, it depends on the mood of the parent, or it depends on which parent I ask, depends on the day of the week, depends on if they're mad at me or if they're happy or whatever. So I think trying to figure out, and that's why you have to be really cautious, I think, about setting firm boundaries. It has to be really well thought out. It's an important discussion to have between parents.
I mean, I often have tried to tell parents, reach school age kids, that if you can establish something like you can't bite or you can't hit, that if you can pretend that's like a law of nature, that this is gravity we're dealing with, not just something we came up with, that it's easier to try to establish. But I think that's a harder task once kids are old enough to have the discussion and say, yes, says who.
That's right. Then they're 13, like, that's not gravity. Come on, you made that up.
Yeah, that's totally, you totally made that up. So it sounds like what you're saying partly is that you're helping parents to recognize that setting boundaries is a good thing. What about teaching parents how to help kids to recover when they do get stressed?
Okay, I love that question because that gets at the meat of this, I think. Years ago, I was listening to this podcast that my brother told me about called Masters of Scale. And on that podcast, they bring on CEOs of companies or people that have been leaders in their field and successful and just have conversations with them. They brought on Sarah Blakely, who founded the clothing company Spanx. I don't actually know much about that clothing line, although I know it's quite successful. And I think Sarah Blakely has just done really well as the founder of that company. At the time, she, of course, had the conversation that I still remember to this day is Sarah Blakely talked about how it was really difficult to do what she did, to achieve the level of success that she did. There were lots of failures along the way. And they were asking, what was it, Sarah, that kind of helped you persevere? And what's your resilience strategy, Sarah? How did you get to where you're at? And she said, literally, that was the culture of her family growing up. She said that her father, around the dinner table, would often ask the kids and everyone as they're gathering around eating dinners, all right, kids, how did you fail today? And that kind of blew me away. I'm like, you had that conversation at the dinner table? How did you fail today? But she said that was a really key feature of her culture growing up, is that they talked about failure. They talked about how, it was not just like you failed, you're a failure. It was not at all. It was you failed, you learned something. You learned how not to do something. So that Thomas Edison concept. I didn't fail inventing a light bulb 10,000 times. I learned 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb or whatever it was. So I think for teenagers, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, and for parents, teaching this practically can sort of embrace this idea of saying, look, looks like quarter end, you have a D minus in your English class, maybe going south. How do you turn that conversation into a lesson about bouncing back, about what did we learn? Sort of in embracing that concept of failure as this learning opportunity. And so I think that's important. I think a lot of kids have an all or nothing perfectionist mentality. And we see that a lot, don't we? Especially in anxiety prone individuals. And they feel that deeply. And to help kids know, it's okay to hit a wrong note. It's okay to mess up. That goes a long way, I think, for teaching this resilience idea.
And it turns out, I think a lot of parents are going to struggle with the same thing, that parenting is a work in progress. And I think that most attempts at parenting will have at least some fails. How do you teach people to turn their fails into teaching?
I love that question. Yeah, here's something that feels really powerful to me. Modeling this conversation between parents, between spouses, for their children, right? Let's say that you're trying to set this firm boundary on something. You're trying to be a good parent. And you sort of look back and say, I think this was a failure. I think what we've sort of try to come up with for a parenting strategy for our kids here isn't working, to sort of have that humility and hold a family council, look at the kids and say, yeah, we failed in this and achieving what we were hoping to. We have an ideal. This was our idea. The idea didn't work. And talk about it open and honestly, and even addressing any sort of hurt or harm. I think embracing that and modeling that as a parent is extremely powerful because the kids are watching constantly. Ginsburg talks about this lighthouse parenting concept too, is the kids are looking to the parents to kind of see how to respond. And if they can look and say, my parents embraced their failure. They talked about it with us. They acknowledged it when they kind of did something that turned out to not be so awesome. I think the same concept when you can show kids like, I messed up as a parent here and I ask your forgiveness and let's do this better. I think that goes a long way.
I've heard said before that it's important that parents recognize that they're not raising babies, they're trying to raise responsible adults who they can love and trust.
Yeah.
How do you get through some of the periods where kids are becoming independent? How do you maintain your authority while also showing your humanity?
What a great question. One thing is to for sure recognize that your role in the life of the child changes as they age. In infancy and to a large extent early childhood, you are directive. You're controlling everything because you have to. But pretty quickly you start to have to back off, letting that toddler kind of choose if they're going to wear socks on both feet or just one. The toddler's demanding choice and autonomy. And your teenager even more so. And eventually you've got a young adult that you still have a relationship to. You're still a parent. I would contend your parenting is not done just because your kid turned 18. But your role does change. You're less directive and you become more of a consultant. And you might have a duty to say something and act in if you feel you need to, but you're no longer in charge of directing and controlling as much as you were when they're little. And I think to recognize that you are still there, the bedrock of love is still there, because that builds their confidence and competence, right? That's going to, even for a young adult, even for an older teenager, to know that if that child messes up, their parents still has that love for them. But in terms of, I'm directing you, kid, yeah, not so much for an 18-year-old. You're here for advice and to consult with. And I think if you can build that relationship and that humanity and be able to like recognize when you mess up with your kid and they can see that in you, that's absolutely human. And they can turn to you then and they will consult with you if they see that in you.
So I think we can both agree that this is an extremely important topic and an extremely important skill set. Okay, so now you're in a well check and you've talked about nutrition, you've talked about the immunizations, you've talked about all those other things. How do you make space for this and how do you work this into the conversation?
So a lot of us are screening pretty carefully for not just developmental milestones, but a sort of adaptive development and behavioral development. And then in 9-year-olds and up, we're asking questions about depression and anxiety. And so I think in the natural course for many well children, these questions of behavior and challenges and stressors do come up. That's a very natural place to talk about it. Another thing that is an opportunity to have this conversation because it dovetails so importantly is when you're talking about the the current issues facing children and that threaten children's wellness. So it's important to have that anticipatory guidance conversation. Once there's check your kid as well, there's still one more piece to that well visit. And that's like, okay, let's talk about what's coming, what is not just developmentally for your child and what's expected, but what's in the air out. What are the societal threats? What's the, for right now, right? A big thing, it still is, it's screen time, social media. A conversation I've been starting to have with my families is let's talk about AI chatbots. Let's talk about where kids are getting information with different online chat options. And because you're choosing to have an anticipatory guidance conversation, you're having to think about what are the threats coming? What are the big stressors coming for your kid? And what's a healthy way to address that? What's a way to build that? So this resilience discussion to me fits really nicely in that kind of thing. Now, yeah, it's tough when you're going fast. So that's the art, I think, of pediatrics is trying to fit this in as you're looking in ears and having conversations and looking at growth charts and reviewing those things, and then leaving time for parents to ask the questions that are on their hearts and minds, and your patients, your older patients, asking them, what's on your hearts and minds? What are you looking at? And I think adolescent medicine does this really when they kick parents out and say, let's have a conversation with our teenage patients and try to build a little more time if possible for teenagers, because they do have these questions.
Any common pitfalls you want to talk about? Things that, as you reflect on all this, that would be either skills you wouldn't want people to try to apply, or maladaptive sort of things that you'd hope to correct, either in the parenting situation or in yourself?
I think that the first thing, Paul, for me that comes to mind is the absolute fingertip accessibility of escapism for kids. A maladaptive way to deal with stress is to escape from it and not deal with it head on. And so many of us, myself included, do this. It's like in small ways. I don't want to write my notes right now. I've got 30 notes to write at the end of the day. That feels stressful. That feels onerous. I'm going to watch the World Cup game right now. It's 2026. We're in the midst of the World Cup. It's escapism. And so with so many kids on their phones and or access to ways to escape, gaming, for example, it's so prevalent that it's a trap. It's a trap for kids because those stressors build up and they're not facing it. We're not facing it. We're not learning the skills that will help us be resilient. It's like the opposite of building resilience. It's becoming a marshmallow instead of something stronger.
Any particular parenting vulnerabilities that you would want to be especially tuned into?
Actually, I think that related to this discussion, the resilience and building resilience, I think the biggest parenting pitfall is to try to protect your child from every possible stressor. And again, Jonathan Haidt makes this point loud and clear in Anxious Generation that kids need that free play. They really do, that they don't need their parents to organize their lives. It's really tempting to do that. I'd say that's a common pitfall, to try to do that. It's all the little things that kids are learning when they don't have their adult supervision. They're learning how to negotiate with their peers on their own. They're kind of working through their little micro conflicts on their own and learning how to regulate their own emotions instead of the parents swooping in to try to solve the issue and trying to make some own decisions on their own. They're sort of navigating these micro problems of social interaction as he describes them. I think that's a big pitfall because you've got this child, your precious project. You want to raise this kid in the best possible way. So you start thinking through, here's all the things I want my kid to do, and I want to protect them from this and that, and I want to help them in every way, and they're going to do all these things. And you can still raise high-level productive kids that know how to play the piano and the cello and are amazing academically and all these things. You can do that, but still allow a lot of this free play as well. That it does seem to be a common pitfall that many of us, I think, are susceptible to.
And I guess going back to what we were talking about at the first, in some ways, it's like building emotional resilience for kids is a lot like what we do with infectious diseases. We recognize that kids are going to deal with the little things, and that helps build a skill set. We try to protect them from the big things.
Yeah.
But what we hope by the end is we have somebody who's got the ability to deal with the things. And so to some extent, it's, I guess, a little bit of supervised dealing with stressors and not putting it in a plastic bubble.
That's right. It's okay for them to kind of go through and play, but at the same time, you're monitoring and trying to make sure that they're going to be protected from catastrophic failure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if they're okay, it's great to climb trees, but if they fall 40 feet, there's a line there, right? It's okay to get a scraped knee, but a broken neck is different. So there's that balance, and that's the nuance of parenting, trying to figure that out.
Yeah, parenting. It's an amazing thing, and it's a real privilege we have of being able to help participate in that. Ryan, thank you so much for spending some time with us this week. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your expertise, and thanks so much for educating us.
Absolute pleasure, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
And I believe even more in quality improvement than I did a half hour ago.
Good. Me too.
I'm persuaded. All right. And to our listeners, thanks for listening. Thanks for your feedback. Let us know what questions you have, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next week. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to getting together again next time. The virtual curbside is available on iTunes or wherever you find your other favorite podcasts. Be sure to like us and subscribe. We want you to like us both because we're needy that way and because that will help other listeners like you find us. Check out our website, vcurb.com, for supporting materials, schedules, and other great stuff. The Virtual Curbside is an educational production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The opinions expressed in this podcast, while carefully considered, are ultimately the opinions of the presenters and not necessarily of the American Academy of Pediatrics or our employers. And remember, the content of this podcast shouldn't be seen as a substitute for seeking actual personal medical care. If this is an emergency, hang up and dial 911. Otherwise, schedule a visit with a caring healthcare provider to try to get to the bottom of your concerns. None of this could happen without Elisa Stoddard, our extraordinary executive director of the Utah AAP. Many thanks to Tim Cosgrove for his help on the website and logo design. Thanks to Phil Wirkus, who composed the theme music. See you next time.